Hello, and welcome to another episode of Words and Bubbles. We've got a good one today. Well, obviously I think it's a good one, otherwise I wouldn't have put it at number 2 on my list of favourite trade paperbacks of 2023. Anyway, it's Nice House on the Lake, Deluxe Edition by James Tynion and Alvaro Martinez Bueno. So another Deluxe Edition, meaning that you get all 12 issues of the series. I originally thought that this was only ever going to be a 12-part series, but it seems that there's going to be more. The blurb on the back says that this is the first cycle. It seems that this was always the plan, rather than success prompting the creators to extend things. Which is good, as originally planned continuations are generally much better than spur-of-the-moment sequels. Whatever the case, I'm looking forward to Cycle 2. Having said that, I do hope, even at this early juncture, that the end is in sight, and that this is not one of those series that is amazing to start with, but then sort of loses its focus and drifts in the middle, before forgetting what it is and ending up a bloated mess. It's not charitable of me to even suggest such a thing, I know. Especially of a book like this that I really enjoyed, from a writer whose previous work I enjoyed. But let's be honest, it does happen, and it happens a fair amount. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. Worst case scenario, that's a topic for something like a 2036 video on series that should have ended but inexplicably haven't. That means back to the present and back to good things. Besides for the 12 issues, the whole first cycle, the Deluxe Edition also contains about 50 pages of extra content, including James Tynion's original pitch. By the way, I'm just going to pause the listing of extra content for a few seconds here, because James Tynion adds the Roman numeral 4 after his name. So do you think I should be calling him James Tynion IV? Or James Tynion Jr.? One sounds annoyingly aristocratic, and the other is obviously ridiculous, and more than a little, well, low-born, I suppose. I don't know what it is about fathers naming their sons after themselves, but after it happens once or twice, it feels like people doing it are generally falling into one of those two camps. Not that I think this is a hard and fast rule. It probably isn't with James, who I assume is a nice, middle-of-the-road sort of guy. Yes, sure, he adds the 4, so he wants us to know he's the 4th, or whatever. But it looks fine in print. It's just that saying it out loud makes me feel stupid, so I wasn't going to say it, wasn't going to mention it at all. But then I got to wondering if, by not saying it, was I being irredeemably rude? Tell you what, I won't say it, at least until I learn that I should. But I will say, right here and now, that I mean no disrespect by this omission. Anyway, back to the content. There are also about 24 variant covers we get to see, and 20 pages of development sketches. So this is a pretty comprehensive offering. Some sort of commentary by Tynion would have been nice, telling us his inspiration and that sort of thing. Because I would like to have a conversation with him about this book, and that's about the closest I'm sure I'll ever get. And if that's how I feel, I'm sure there are others that feel the same way. But it's not a critical omission, and I totally understand why it's not here. This being the first cycle, if I were him, I wouldn't want to show my hand either. So hopefully, once he's authored all he wants to on the series, once all the cycles have cycled, he'll tell us his thoughts. Alright, so what is The Nice House on the Lake? Back in about 2021, before I'd read the first issue, but after I'd been told that Tynion's upcoming series was going to be a horror series, I assumed that it would be some sort of cabin in the woods, or more precisely, some typical horror in which a group of friends is trapped in a creepy cabin by some sort of monster. I mean, it's James Tynion, so I assumed there'd be some spin on the formula, but I still thought cabin and monster. I know this title specifically says nice house, rather than creepy cabin. What can I say? I didn't put much thought into my assumption. Anyway, when I did start reading it, I didn't immediately realize how wrong I had been, because it started something like those creepy horrors, with a guy inviting his friends to spend a week at a lake house owned by a friend of his mother's. If that doesn't scream by the numbers horror, I don't know what does. Also, the first issue's cover was of a woman in a lake surrounded by skeletons, so they definitely lent into the whole typical horror thing. The cover of the Deluxe Edition, which I showed at the beginning of the video, isn't any better. There it's the whole cast, 12 of them, one for each issue, on the bank of the lake. And again, there are skulls everywhere, and creepy trees, which give even more of a cabin-in-the-woods vibe. When I started reading, I soon learnt that the house wasn't quite what I'd imagined though. Even if my imaginings had been formed after properly reading the book's title, it wouldn't have been what I was expecting, because the house was less a nice house and more a mansion. But not an old, creepy, horror story mansion. This was a modern mansion made of steel and glass and wood and natural stone, of airy communal areas and breathtaking views of the lake, of light. It's a bit over the top and possibly a bit garish, but it's still a welcoming mansion with every convenience. So a nice mansion then, which admittedly is a nice house. It's just not what immediately sprung to mind. Bottom line though, it's a pretty nice place to spend a week. The people also aren't what one would necessarily expect them to be if the book was a typical horror. No group of teenagers, half of whom are loud and obnoxious, so the reader doesn't mind all that much if they meet grisly ends. No, these are all three-dimensional characters in their 30s. All of them are friends of Walter's. He's the guy that invited them all. They're his friends from school, or his friends from college, or his friends from hanging out in New York's clubs and bars. So they all know each other, but some of the relationships are deep and intimate, while others are pretty superficial. So pretty much a realistic representation of social gatherings then. Us readers obviously go in knowing none of the characters, or their relationships with each other. So Tynion employs a number of techniques to inform us of their shared histories. First, as I sort of mentioned earlier, is that each of the characters has one of the issues dedicated to them. They are on the cover of the original comic book, and their relevant issue starts with them telling us about their relationship with Walter. They tell us these tales from the house on the lake, but from some time in the future when the place looks like it's in ruins and burning, as though it's just gone through, or is going through, some sort of apocalypse. The rest of the issue then highlights that character, with much of the story being from their perspective. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but it's generally the case. This is a slow unfolding, a piecemeal revealing of the story. But at the start, Tynion also gives us a quick snapshot of each of the characters, so that we've got an overview of who they are and how they know Walter. Part of this is giving each of the characters a title based on their profession, and a symbol based on that profession. So there's the artist, and her painter's palette symbol, and the reporter, whose symbol looks like a question mark. There is in-book logic given for this system. Walter says that it will be a fun way to leave messages for only the intended person. Also, while arranging everything, he wanted to be able to talk freely, while keeping the guest list mysterious, because, again, fun. This makes sense, but as it plays no real part in the plot, at least so far, it's probably meant for us. Both to allow us to keep things straight, but also to elevate the characters into archetypes. It's a technique that generally works, though it does make the start of the book a bit of an info dump, where we don't need to just learn a dozen names, but also the professions and symbols attached to each of those names. And I'm going to be honest here, sometimes the artwork doesn't help. Not that I'm complaining about Bueno's work in general. This book is from DC's Black Label, more or less their imprint that produces age-restricted comics, so it's pretty much the successor to their Vertigo line, and Bueno's work would very much belong in something like a Vertigo book. It's moody and gritty, and Jordi Belaire's colours are dark, which all fits the subject matter. But it does mean that sometimes the faces of the characters aren't clear, and it takes a moment or two to figure out who's who. Tynion also inserts fragments of other documents to move things along. Emails from Walter, posts on social media, transcripts of conversations, scribbled notes in a notebook. There's even some stream of consciousness stuff, all of which could make things confusing, or, even worse, annoying. But I never found myself confused or annoyed. Okay, so all of Walter's friends arrive at the house, and while there, they read on social media that the world is ending, that buildings are burning and that people's skin is falling off. I know, gross. Walter's friend's immediate instinct is to return, to see how they can help, to be with those they love. Walter stops them, telling them that there is no world for them to return to, that he built this wonderful house and brought them to it so that he could save them from what he and his people were doing to the world. Walter also reveals his true form. Well, sort of. The concept designs for Walter show that he was initially conceived as looking very much like an alien. But as things progressed, this was modified so that he looked like his flesh was undulating, constantly in flux between the old Walter and something human minds can't process. Before any of them can even begin to come to terms with what's happening, Walter leaves. Not for good. He's always on the boundary of their perceptions, watching. And he does return later, but for the most part, he leaves them alone. He hopes, in doing so, they will learn to accept what has happened, and that they will eventually be happy in this enormous house he built. Because, despite everything, he actually is their friend. He loves them and wants to do what he can to save them. But these people have been ripped from everything they love, and feeling any sort of gratitude towards one of the beings responsible for killing the world is beyond them. Still, some try to make the best of the situation. Others fall into despair. Others investigate. Those who investigate discover a weapons cache hidden in the house, another dark house on the other side of the lake, and unsettling sculptures, one of which shows whoever's touching it their home. The experience is never pleasant. More importantly, they discover that they can't die here, and that Walter has complete control over their memories. But the most important questions: what is Walter? Why did his people destroy the earth? Is there any hope of escape? These are left unanswered. Well, Walter does answer the last one, saying that there isn't. Can he be trusted? And I don't just mean because he could be lying. I mean because he has complete control over what they hear and what they see. As I said, he even has control over their memories. So how can they even know what's real? Are they in a lake house in upstate Wisconsin? Are they even on Earth? And has the Earth really been destroyed? And if it has, how long ago did that happen? The answer to this last one seems easy, but if they can't die and their memories have been tampered with, who actually knows? It's all very Plato's cave. Which I enjoy. I think most people enjoy. The unknown touches on something deep in the human psyche. It hints at the big questions that have kept philosophers, scientists, and religious scholars up at night, suggesting that maybe, if I understand what is happening in the story, I will understand the world a little better. What could be more enticing than that? And without this unknown, the story would be much reduced. It would basically be a Brainiac story without Superman. A story where the alien collects a few humans to preserve and then destroys the rest. Which brings me back to something I said at the beginning, that I hope the end of this series is in sight. Because if it isn't, the temptation for Tynion to provide answers may become overwhelming. And as someone who has watched the Matrix films and the Lost series, and most of the adaptations of Stephen King's works, I don't see how the answers he gives, no matter what they are, will be as satisfying as the questions he has asked. Okay, that's everything I wanted to say about the nice house on the lake. I hope you enjoyed watching this. Please come back again, and thank you.